Okay, so I'm Sarah Milstein, and this is a little unusual. A couple ways. So first of all, normally when I am asked to speak at an event, I first ask whether there will be good representation of people of color at the event on stage. I identify as white, but I don't speak at events where all the other speakers are white or even primarily white. And this time around, when Paula reached out to me, I was so excited. I mean, I grew up at MoMA. I'm a huge fan of Paula's. When she reached out to me, I was so excited I just lost my head and forgot to ask, which is a little bit ironic because I'm here to speak about diversity at events. So I want to note before I get going a couple of things. First of all, this isn't normal for me, but also this is not normal in another way, which is pretty obvious, which is that Paula has assembled here 4 women, all of whom are experts, and we were invited for our expertise, not because we're women. Now, as easy as it is to put together a panel where everybody is accidentally white, it is just as easy to put together a panel where everybody turns out to be a man. So we don't want to take for granted that this is a panel of folks on the humble brag side here. Everybody's an expert, and that's why we're here. Right, now, another thing I want to note is that when we realized this had happened, Paula and I had a really good discussion also with Paula on her team. And we talked about the fact that even though this is a pretty white panel up here, that doesn't mean we can't talk about race. In fact, quite the opposite. So we are hoping that part of the discussion today really talks about issues of diversity beyond gender. All right, so let's see, with that in mind, let's talk about conferences. In all sectors, in the arts sector, as I just mentioned, but in all sectors, in business, in education, everywhere, conferences tend to put primarily white people and men on stage. This is just a screenshot of a business conference from a year ago. It's 27 speakers, 5 women, 1 black person. That's terrible, and this is way better than most conferences. Even much, much larger conferences often have like maybe 5 women, maybe 1 black person. All right, so why should we even care about this? Like, why does this matter? Well, there's a few reasons. One of them is a moral reason, and I think this one is actually plenty good on its own, which is that the people that you put on stage as a conference organizer, you're shining a light on them. Sometimes you pay them, although we'll talk about this in a minute, very often not. But you're shining a light on them, and speakers usually get a lot of professional opportunities out of speaking. It leads to other good things. So when you're only shining a light on a very small group of people, that same kind of person, you're really restricting the opportunities of other people. All right? So that's a good reason on its own, but there are also a bunch of reasons that you might selfishly want to have a more diverse speaker roster. So an important one is that often conferences describe themselves as trying to spark conversation or debate. And when you have everybody on stage has a similar experience, you miss out on perspectives and stories and voices. You wind up with a monoculture of ideas. So for most conferences, that's not the goal, right? In addition, when you start to have all the same kinds of speakers, you wind up with people who are on the speaking circuit. And that is really a missed opportunity. I mean, for one thing, it's boring for attendees, but for another thing, part of what we can do as conference organizers, the value we can bring to audiences, is finding people that nobody knows already. People who have great advice and great stories to share that are not yet on the speaking circuit, right? So that's one of the huge things that we can do. And then finally, it's good for the bottom line. This is just a pure business reason. There's lots of evidence that shows that having a more diverse speaker roster draws a more diverse attendee base. Most conferences need every person they can get to fill the seats. All right, so that's why we care. And I want to note here that when we're talking about getting white women and people of color on stage, what we're talking about here is not filling demographic slots, but finding great speakers who are overlooked by the normal processes for finding speakers. Right? We're talking about great candidates. All right, so how does this happen? What are those normal processes? Conferences use 2 methods primarily to find speakers. And some conferences use both and some use one. But either way, there's 2 primary ones. So the first one is that you have some kind of open application process, and anybody could apply. And the other is that you invite people. And that could be people that you know, friends and colleagues, or it could be people you know of. People who are well known, like Jeff Immelt or Gretchen Rubin or Paula. In either case, those things look pretty fair, like anybody could participate in them. But the thing that's really tricky is that they are not. So in fact, for very good social reasons, white women and people of color tend not to either apply for positions or be identified by an invitation process. And the numbers look something like this. If you don't do anything to tweak your process and you have an open application, about 10% of the people who apply will be white women and 2% will be people of color. And when you do a brainstorm to figure out who to invite, the numbers will be worse. So the pool of people that you're picking from before you've even started your decision-making process is a really imbalanced pool. And then your own biases kick in and prevent you from picking, often, white women and people of color. So that your own biases can be very strong as well. In addition, for any given conference, there are many, many more great speaking candidates than there are speaking slots. And worse, there are usually many great candidates than you need from the pool of white men alone. So you have to be super intentional about this and really committed if you want to make change. And in fact, what happened here, that we wound up being a pretty white panel here, that sort of demonstrates, and this is something that Paola and I talked about, it really demonstrates how hard this is. It takes sustained commitment over a long period of time. So there are about a dozen ways that, that conference hosts can really change the game. There are 12 things you can do, more or less. None of them alone is very hard, but you have to do pretty much all of them to really make change, and you have to do them over a very long period of time. I don't have time to get into each of them, but I'm going to give you two very quick examples. One is that the language that you use can really be important, and it's subtle. So if you say that you are looking for experts in a field, two kinds of people will identify themselves to you. People who have some kind of third-party validation, like they have the Nobel Prize, and men. If you want women to get into the conversation with you about speaking at your event, you have to say that you're looking for people with expertise. It's pretty subtle, right? But it's hugely powerful, hugely powerful. Along the same lines, when you go out to your network to say that you're looking for people with certain kinds of expertise, if you say, we're looking for people who have expertise in 3D printing, everybody in your network will send you a list of white guys, and they'll all be great candidates, and it'll be who is at the top of their head. If you say, we're looking for people with expertise in 3D printing, we're particularly keen on white women and people of color, they will send you incredible candidates who they wouldn't have suggested if you didn't ask specifically. So you have to put in a lot of work that's very thoughtful and very detail-oriented. All right, so I want to switch gears for just a minute to talk about the role of the internet. One of the things it can do, of course, is help you find people you don't already know, people who are not part of your immediate community. And for conferences, the internet can be everything. It can provide tools for registration, for finding venues, for marketing. It's really a huge source. And in fact, as we've noted here, there's like a whole proliferation of events recently. And a lot of that is because people online have been inspired to get together and meet with the same people offline. Right? The internet plays a huge role in that. But it makes things look a little bit too easy. So one of the things to note is that conferences are actually very hard to pull off. The logistics are tricky. The finances are nearly impossible. And I want to just give you a quick example. This is even without paying your speakers. It is very hard to get to cover your expenses with registration alone. A lot of conferences have to get grants and other sources of funding. And if you really want to be profitable, in most cases, you need very significant sponsorship. And you can only get sponsors, normally, if you have a very big crowd that's very well defined and you do a whole enterprise sales process with potential sponsors. It is not easy. And part of the reason that the costs are so high is the way that the whole industry is structured. So you guys probably know most of the conferences you go to are at hotels. And hotels are set up for conferences. They have the right kind of space and the AV and everything. The deal with hotels is that typically you get the space more or less free or very cheap, but you pay for their labor, which is always union, and you pay F&B, the food and beverage, which has to be provided by the hotel. You cannot bring in your own. So by way of example, 5 years ago I was running a conference a block away from here, 2,000 people. We wanted to give out candy, put up bowls of candy in between the sessions. They were going to charge us $3 per Jolly Rancher to put them out in bowls. The lunches, the bad lunches that you get at conferences typically cost the conference $100 for something that you would be appalled to pay $12 for at a deli. It's rough. The other way you can go is to use a raw space like what the Puck building used to be. I don't know if they still are. In those cases, they're not, you still have to bring in sometimes the walls, the furniture, the AV, the staff, the F&B, everything you have to bring in, and that is considerable, right? It's hard. So, the success in conferences is not guaranteed. It really can be tricky. And one of the things I want you to think about is you can make things better by having a pretty diverse group of speakers because it will help spark better conversations. It will help bring in more attendees, and you need every single attendee you can get. But while that success is not guaranteed, your bias in finding speakers is, both the selection methods that we use and our own individual decisions, so we have to be really intentional about it. And I'm happy to talk about any of this more as we go. Thank you so much.